Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Bill Valerio. I'm the director of the museum, and it is a wonderful fall at Woodmere with Barbara Bullock, Fearless Vision, on our walls. And it's wonderful that all of you have joined us. I always say, and we were just talking, that the job of a museum is to share art with people and then to open the art up. And that's our goal this afternoon with our two wonderful speakers, to kind of get under the skin of the art and really open it up and explore it together. Our two speakers today are artists that I admire greatly, artists who are represented in Woodmere's collection, artists that we have done projects with of various kinds, exhibition projects, education projects, podcasts, the list goes on, and I'm speaking of my friend Syd Carpenter and my friend Andrea Packard, who are both rock stars. And let's give it up in a big way for Andrea and Syd. And both Andrea and Syd have deep and long friendships and understandings and inspiration that comes from Barbara Bullock. And I think it was that sense understood by Hildy Tao, who's Woodmere's director of education, who's standing in the back, but is the person who organizes all of that. Yeah, and let's hear it for Hildy. Yeah. It was Hildy who really, conceived of today's program as an opportunity, for, two artists who we know to be incredibly articulate in their own ways, in different ways, who each have a very special relationship, not only to Barbara as a person, but to Barbara's art and to the, to the incredible emotions that Barbara's work just animates and that we feel all around us in the galleries. So we're gonna start. I think Andrea is going to begin. Syd will follow. Then we will have a question and answer session, and we encourage it to be dynamic and open, and there are no bad questions, and we want to create a dialogue, which we are recording, and we will put the recording up on Woodmere's website later on for other people to be able to share and remember. And then, of course, I have to point out that Barbara Bullock herself is here. Yeah, let's make Barbara blush. Yeah. So thank you again for joining us. I'm looking forward to this afternoon's program. Thank you, Andrea and Syd, for being with us. And I'm going to shut off my microphone, and we hand the program over to you.
Thank you, Bill, and all the staff at Woodmere who are paragons in their fields. And it's an honor to be here with my good friend Syd Carpenter and the many esteemed artists and curators and collectors and art lovers who are here today. Woodmere is a very special place, and as an artist and a curator, I come here for renewal. And for that vaccine, I think we're all getting a little vaccine dose today against the challenges of the world, which is something that art does very well, and Barbara has shown herself to be a master in seeking, healing, and transmitting it to us through her art. So what Syd and I discussed is that I would show a few slides first, then she'll show a few slides, and then we'll talk together more and invite your questions. So here's the first slide I wanted to share is a glimpse of Barbara's studio. And just out of curiosity, how many people have had the honor of ever seeing her studio space? Okay, a good number here. And I'm sure, I believe I'm speaking for all of us who have been there, that it's an unbelievable space. It reflects the life work of a mature artist who is always curious, experimental, voraciously seeking out and taking new influences and integrating them into her life and art. There is no distinction. And when you look in this studio, and this is just a corner of it, there are also baskets from all over the world, African art, magazines, evidence of her own photography and voracious reading. So much there, that so much intelligent research and voracious study has gone into her practice. When you see this space or encounter her work here, it might be hard to imagine the kind of childhood she had and the seemingly insurmountable obstacles that stood in her way as a young creative person with so much promise. So as I believe many here know, Barbara's family moved from North Carolina during the period of the Great Migration from the south to the north, and they settled in this Germantown area, thankfully a predominantly black area, where they could find community and work. And she suffered the loss of her mother at an early age, but found in her stepmother Gertrude a second mother, and was supported by family and friends in her love of reading and dance and music and drawing, and was recognized for her promise. But it was, of course, still a time of Jim Crow segregation, and I believe she was 16 when Brown v. Board of Education decision was made saying that schools should be desegregated, but it was a long, justice was, and it still is, a long way off. And even a decade later, there were race riots in Philadelphia protesting the brutality. And so it was in that atmosphere that she was exploring her own diverse creative talents and realizing that that art was a direction. At 18, finding different jobs and taking classes at Fleischer and then the Hushin School of Design, where she was not only one of the only students of color, but also the only woman artist. Many of the others were vets, and as some know here, she was nearly expelled for drawing Michelangelo's David as a person of color. But since that forum for study obviously did not feed her soul, she went and found people who did, and soon found community in a growing group of young, dynamic, black artists who were meeting at the studio of John Simmons and others, and coming up with questions. And as Barbara said, you know, they'd stay up till 4 in the morning, saying, well, you know, do you think of yourself as a black artist or an artist? And what are you looking at? And examining inspiring artists and exploring how to understand the arts of Africa and the diaspora. These are some of the influences and questions that led her to this place you see here in this picture. And in the 80s, Barbara traveled not only to Africa, but the Caribbean, Latin America, in search of inspirations that would take her beyond the kind of colonial white canon that she came up in. And this piece is upstairs on the balcony, Child in the Land of Spirits. It's one of many works she made as she began to travel abroad. From 1980 till 2003, she made numerous trips to different countries in Africa. I mean, I can't even remember them all, but you know, Ethiopia, Senegal, Morocco, Egypt, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, South Africa, Niger. And she, like many other artists, found inspiration in numerous diverse narratives. She was raised Catholic, actually, went to Catholic school, but found affinities, of course, in the various spiritual traditions throughout Africa. And in Nigeria, the Nigerian art traditions, which are so rich, found inspiration in the art of Twins 7/7, a noted artist many of you might know, and the book The Famished Road, which talks about the dilemma. The protagonist in that book is a child, an archetypal figure who is caught between the spirit world and the hardships of everyday life. The idea that the world is so difficult, there's famine, there's so much violence, that the spirit world can call more alluringly than the everyday life. And that there are those who are here amongst us, there's the otherworldly world, and then there's those who are mediate between those worlds. So this child in the land of spirits is an archetype, and Barbara might put this in a different way, but I think many would find this figure an archetype of the child in all of us that is journeying through a bewildering world and seeking direction, seeking guidance among the spirits, among the living, among the animal world and natural world. And this collage, like so many of the collages she's made, embody her own journey, confronting similar dilemmas, and also the figure, the collage journeys throughout her studio, throughout not many exhibits, because it's seldom exhibited. I had the honor of curating an exhibit of Barbara's work last year at Swarthmore College, and she didn't let me have this piece. It was important to her, I'll admit it. It was important for it to be in her studio after the pandemic. It was important for it to continue nourishing and guiding her work. So this archetype of a child in need of guidance, tenuously on this earth for a brief time, also is sort of a muse for Barbara and for others. And it floats, not in a frame, but directly on the wall. And that openness to the surrounding space is part of its power. It's not closed in, it's not boxed, it's not a recipe for life. It's radically open. This kind of radical openness I see in Barbara's work, and that I've been thinking a lot about for myself as a person as well as an artist, is I think one of the most admirable things about Barbara's work. It wasn't until the 80s that she began doing these shaped pieces, like used furniture here, which is right behind you all on that wall. But it reflects a kind of creative agility, the ability to take pieces of colored paper, making shapes, distilling inspirations from Africa and elsewhere, and putting them together in ever-changing combinations that can speak to us. This particular piece was one of a series of work she did, having completed more than 23 trips to Africa and elsewhere. She encountered, as we all did, the news of the Hurricane Katrina, which devastated New Orleans. And she just watched in disbelief as 15,000 people or more were trapped in the Louisiana Superdome, and many of them people of color, and saw how these mostly poor and minority communities were disproportionately affected in this country by institutionalized problems and racism. And so this piece was one of a series of works that, as she said, she thought, am I looking at another country? She began to look at this country as a country in need of even greater healing than before. And this piece and Chasing After Spirits, part of a series she did sort of subsequently and in parallel, was a way of kind of bringing together her journeys abroad with her journey here as an American, looking for justice, looking for meaning, looking for art forms that can kind of embody both her openness to change and her desire to reshape the world in a way that would be more meaningful, more filled with spirit. And let's see. I wanted to also, this is stealing one of Syd's comments actually, that we had a conversation earlier about just some of the many things we admire about Syd. I admire you, Syd, very much too, about Barbara. Both, paragons for me of a creative practice where everything they do is creative, and there isn't just sort of this, oh, you're a painter, oh, you're a sculptor. It's like everything is integrated. It's all part of this investigative journey. And Syd was pointing out how it's important to stress that Barbara, even in her 80s, is basically killing it. She's like, move over, young artists, because, are you working as hard as Barbara? Are you making work that's as open and dynamic? I mean, if you're just coming right out of art school, if you're any age, it's just like, it's inspiring to go to her studio, to go to one of her exhibits and see this is still happening. And when I was curating her show, I had the great pleasure of seeing the portraits that she had begun during the pandemic, when of course we were all in quarantine, all kind of in shock. And Barbara had the added challenge of having lost her own brother, who she was very close to the pandemic, to COVID. And out of that and many other things, she felt she needed to move away from the large shaped pieces to this more intimate series of portraits that she began in 2020. And she created an ongoing series. And they're not portraits of a particular people, a couple of particular people, but they're not meant to be likenesses, tight representations of a person, not photographic. Instead, they're more abstracted, they're more archetypal, they're more about embodying the presence of a vital person, the spirit of a person perhaps, but also thinking about portraiture as a way to honor our ancestors, to honor those in our community who are important. And I think when artists work this way, sometimes they start out with an idea like, okay, this has to honor my brother, or this has to honor, so-and-so. But other times one works intuitively, and then you think, this piece has ended up being about this. And so the titles, I sometimes think, they're all archetypes, but sometimes the titles are more specific. And for example, this one, George Floyd, and this is also on the balcony, is one of a couple that are specifically responding to the horrific brutality that we were all witnessing, have been witnessing for decades, but that we especially saw in 2020 with the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of a police officer. And so this piece honors George Floyd and others by implication who endured that, and it speaks to the need to be mindful. And there are other works in this show, and that I think Syd will talk about, that use art as a way of connecting us to the past, to the present, to the very contemporary events before us, and also to the future, to like that child in the child's spirit, reminding of us also of the need to find our way forward. So with that, I'm going to pass the clicker to you to lead us forward.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to this one. Thank you, Andrea. She has so beautifully contextualized Barbara's work and her influence and the impact of the work. And I, as an artist, wanted to look deeply into what she has done and created and the how, perhaps. And so the first thing that I think about when I see this body of work is to acknowledge the mastery that is exhibited here in these works. There is a sublime mastery of making. So for me, Barbara's, her world of making is supported by and just, it stands on its own because of it, the way that she has been able to adapt materials and process in support of these very, very complicated and rich stories. So virtuosity is an important part of my reaction to Barbara's work. The precision of the cutting, of the assemblage, all of those things speak to the fact that we have someone who is completely a master of how these ideas, these stories can be presented. So that is really, really a critical part of all of this. So as an artist myself, I'm walking through and I'm looking at the sensuality of her pieces. So one of the pieces that is showing up here, Remembrance, it is a piece that speaks to the folklore, the traditions, the histories, and she finds a way of embodying them in these gorgeously executed works. You can see in this piece up in the upper right of Yemenya, who is the equivalent of a goddess. She is a goddess. She is the river goddess. And she is able to tell us stories about that kind of imagination, that place where we can find ourselves in terms of our spirituality. And I think that that's one of the key issues around Barbara's work, is the way she is able to bring the tactility together so that we can feel ourselves in these images. There's a physicality about them. There's a richness about the application of paint. There is the drawing themselves that is masterful, because that is one of the things that's also key in these, is that Barbara, as a skilled artist, is able to implement her stories through this mastery of process. So virtuosity is one of my important points. And it's about not so much the how of making, because that's already there. It's about because. Why would we lend ourselves? Why would she develop these very prodigious skills? And it's in the service of creating these spaces that we can occupy that are the spaces of imagination, spaces of refuge. These are all ephemeral intangibles, but Barbara has been able to create objects, images that link us to the intangible. And I think that you had mentioned that whole idea of being in reality, but also part of the spiritual. And so how do we do that? How does an artist accomplish that? And cover their tracks, because that's really important. So when I look at Barbara's work, I see her being able to transport me through her use of materials. And you could possibly suggest, well, it becomes easy for her to do it. But I think it's one of those things that she has developed over time, over the decades, and there's this fluency. And I think the fluency is what's so critical in her presentation as an artist, is that here she is after decades of making, so fluent in the ability to take materials and create ephemerality, spirituality. to create this sense of otherworldliness, but at the same time, linking them to the present. So she can do that with a portrait of George Floyd. She can do that with an object like the Trayvon Martin piece, that she can do that with transformations. And so to me, that to me is the pinnacle. That becomes this situation where the art is beyond the sum of its parts. And when an artist gets to that point where they can create beyond the sum of their parts and still connect, that to me is mastery. That's the virtuosity. So the other thing that is really, really engaging for me is that everything on this first level is almost human scale. And I find that to be a really, really important way of accessing what's going on in them, because they become us. They are reflections of us. We feel our bodies in them because of the size. Now, I don't know if that's intentional, but each one of these, when I walk around and stand in front of them, I feel as if I'm encountering a being that is my equal. And so I'm not looking at these objects as artifacts. I'm looking at them as engaging, autonomous beings that she has created and that she has presented to us in ways that draw us in. And she's doing that through layering. And you can look at layering metaphorically, and you can also see layering physically and tangibly. And that use of layering with scale gives you this sense of an encounter, as opposed to there's a hierarchy of this is the object, this is the viewer. No, you are in conversation with these objects themselves, and they are revealing themselves over time. And that's an important issue too, is the issue of time in Barbara's work, and how she's able to convey time through her use of materials. The fact that she can take paper and paint and move these things through space, so that you are not, you do not become acquainted with these objects on one sitting or one viewing. It's important for you to come back, and I'm so happy to know that so many people have been coming back for a second viewing of these, because each time you see them, there's revelation. And that, I think, is a hallmark, a critical hallmark of any enduring work of art, is this idea of relationships that are established over time. And she's doing that skillfully. Maybe at this point it has become intuitive to her. Her level of an ability to relate and to manipulate materials has gotten to a state where she can just use them the same way we use words, the same way we use music, that these are things that she can access and that they can become manifest in these works. So, and looking at this one, it's one of the earlier works, Remembrance, and you can see her beginning to find a pathway through Yoruba religion, a West African Yoruba religion, and to build these figures and images and begin to tell those stories in this engaging, sensual, seductive way. I want to go to this one, which happens after she's been working with these figures and doing paintings, and coming to the healing altar itself, and working with the idea of a kind of architectural, but still a visceral object, an image. And you're looking at the layers, but you're also confronting a being. and there's this structure, and there's story. And each time you go to it, it reveals something else as you delve into it and read it like a page, but you hear it like music. You sense her hand, but the object itself, the being itself, is presenting itself in its full glory. It's frontal. You could say that it's flat and two-dimensional, but at the same time, it is pushing against its edges. It creates this sense of complexity, richness. There's an articulate use of shape. So you can enter this from so many different points. You know, access is critical to building up that relationship between an object and itself. And so recognizability is critical in this, in that it looks perhaps like an animal confronting you or approaching you. It looks like a figure, it looks like a building, but inside each layer there's important information that allows you to engage this and have a conversation with it. And so that to me is so critical, that the object is not known immediately. The object is something that is going to reveal itself over time. And she's doing this with cut paper, okay? The idea of taking a blade or a knife and cutting and painting. So this is not new, okay? So what I wanted to do is read off a list of people that she's having a conversation with. And those people are people that we would definitely recognize and acknowledge in terms of their use of paper. Let me just get that list out for you. So we could begin with the 18th century artist. Her name was Mary Delaney. We're talking about paper cuts. Is anybody aware of Mary Delaney? So she used cut paper to produce unbelievably realistic reproductions of flowers. And she started this practice when she was 72 years old. And so I would advise all of you to look up Mary Delaney to see the amazing images. So after that, if we go from Mary Delaney, we could jump to Henry Matisse. Of course, she's having a conversation with Matisse. Romare Bearden. Of course, Kara Walker's silhouettes. Also, Wangechi Mutu, who was a contemporary artist who uses paper cuts. Njideka Akonyili Crosby and Deborah Roberts. These are all people who have been using this process. But I would argue that Barbara has taken this to another level. And she took it to another level early on. And the way that she is able to take those paper cuts and create these ephemeral but tactile beings that we see in these objects on the wall, these objects that speak to you viscerally. And it's that transition, that ability for her to reinterpret and take this apparently basic kind of process and turn it into something that becomes beyond, once, as I said before, something that is beyond the sum of its parts. So this is really what I think of as being critical to her. She's also done pop-up books. Her portraits are distinct from them all, and that positions her work in terms of its place in any kind of canon. It becomes iconic. It's always going to be recognized as the way that Barbara Bullock cuts paper and forms it in space, and how we return to it and how we are able to relate to it in terms of its physicality and its occupation of a space that is equal to our own. So her voice stands out, and it you cannot duplicate it. I dare you to try to duplicate it, really. Barbara has distinguished herself, and I believe that she belongs in that canon of artists who have taken this mode of making, her virtuosity, her use of scale, her use of layering, all of these things that place her as one of the masters of contemporary art.
Can I riff off of that a little bit?
Please.
I thought I'm nodding so much I feel like a bobblehead doll, but everything you said resonated with me, and I also thought one of the elements of her mastery is her use of color, which I think is so hard to talk about because we all have different associations with color, but obviously Barbara uses black in a powerful way, intentionally so, since, as she said, it's been so often associated with negative things in culture, and that she has taken that color and created it in myriad forms in a way that is a source of power and a source of beauty. And that is part of her mastery, is her mastery of black and her transformative use of black. Sometimes it is the night, sometimes it is form, it's elemental, it's everything, and all the other colors become stronger because of it. So the deep saffrons, the deep reds, the viridian greens, these are distinctive colors. Her palette is very distinctive, but it's always rich and deep, and all the colors become stronger together, which is a pretty wonderful metaphor, I think, for what should be happening, is that there should be a synergistic community in the formation of art and also the formation of community. So color is something that came to mind. And also, I loved what you said about scale. I think that some of the works feel like presences, exactly as you said. They are almost totemic presences and beyond words, like speak about it at your peril, because you might violate something sacred. So here we are supposed to talk about the work, but I feel there's a part of the work that is very private, that is part of the mastery, and it's private because it is so sacred. And so this is just something we know, that this is work of integrity. It is not created to make a sale. In fact, a lot of the work, I've seen Barbara turn down shows from big, major galleries because she's on her path. And the work has to, this is a beautiful piece. It can't be in such and such a show because it has a life of its own. And it's speaking to us in a certain way. And so that's part of our mastery too, is that her integrity is something that makes her work vital and makes it special in a world that could use more of that.
I also wanted to comment on the works that are here, and to call attention to the fact that there were scores that were not included, and what kind of conversation this body of work represented, what kind of conversation they are having with each other themselves, because we're at a retrospective, and that is supposed to represent a lifetime of work or from one period to another. But to me, containing it in this quantifiable number doesn't even begin to speak to the depth of the work and the life and the stories that have produced the body of work. So just so that you would understand that what you're seeing here is but the tip of the experiences that are being expressed here. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to make these selections, because once you see them in this collection, assumptions are made about this artist's world of making and what they've made. And there's so much that is not being seen here. She could do a whole retrospective on the books. She could do a whole retrospective on these assemblages here. I mean, just, there's so much there. And so that is what's humbling to me as an artist, is that the depth of her productivity, and that each one represents a certain kind of insight that is the tip of the iceberg for each image. And just what did it take to get to that point? Transformation to, you know, how many preceded it? That kind of, my sense of experimentation, of taking chances, of risk, and then also being comfortable with that process. When you're making something, to allow things to happen. I see so many opportunities, or at least so many examples of allowing things to evolve and change and be edited and moved, and all of the possibilities of it. And as an artist working in her studio, how much of that can we see consolidated into one object? So the brilliance of these, the possibility of these, is overwhelming to me as a maker, knowing what it takes to get one, and then to say, this is my retrospective, this is the thing that represents what I've done for the past 50 years. And my response to that is, maybe. Because I don't know what else she would have chosen. You know, walking through this, if my retrospective, maybe she would have said, oh, I should have put the other one. You know, it's that kind of thing. How do you tell your story? And then you get a catalog. And then that catalog completely, what is it? It consolidates it, it compresses it, all of those things. So know, when you do take that catalog home, that this is not all of Barbara. She's, you know, there's she has had to compress to give you this momentary picture of her as the artist.
Is this a good time to ask if people have questions? I think Hildy has a mic for if anybody has comments or questions.
Testing, testing. I'm an artist, and I've known Barbara for quite a number of years, and we constantly discuss art. And I think that for me, the most important thing that you have alluded to is that I think Barbara connects with the world, but then she becomes a living, pulsating entity. And the entity, the pulse, just blows into, without thinking about it, blows into the creation of things. And I think using all these words, which is wonderful and explanatory, is almost like lacking the ability to express the unexpressible. And I think that it's like having a religious experience. As soon as you talk about the religious experience, it demotes the religious experience, because you're not able to talk about it. And I think one of the things that both of you alluded to was the pulsating experience that emanates from the works of art. And they're not, Barbara doesn't set out to say, I'm going to make something that is really incredible. She just gives her, and I'm speaking for her, sorry, she gives herself over, literally, mind, body, everything, gives herself over to experiencing all of the emotions that we all have. And I think occasionally she separates herself and makes a conscious decision about something, but I think most of the time she is just in a flux of life and pulse. And it's, I think, indescribable, as much as we try.
So I hope everybody could hear that. I'm not going to try to repeat it. I was asked to repeat questions, but I think what Diane was saying was more of a comment, just that the works do what we all want to do as artists, which is do something that words can't do. And one of her recent works has a title, Otherworldly, which I think, again, hits home on the idea of like, what does that mean? Can we create something from this world that connects us with the world beyond? And what that is different for each person here, but there's a moment of recognition that happens in the making of the work and the seeing of the work that we share in this space. Did you want to add anything to that?
The idea of being able to translate those kind of ephemeral, transitional, out of reach kinds of sensations, that thing that we sense around us. I think we all, as much as we would like to establish ourselves as rational beings, I think that we are well aware of these mysterious little edges around us. And so what Barbara, for me, has done is she has cracked the door. I can look around and possibly get a sense of that, and that's what her work is about, is penetrating, or at least giving you a sense of what's beyond. And doing it with cut paper and paint. And so to me, the mundane nature of material and the aspiration to something immaterial and beyond the sum of what it's made of, that's the path that Barbara has taken, and that we can have faith in that and the permeability of our edges.
Anybody else?
Yes, I first would like to say I'm so grateful to be here today. And hear both of you ladies describe, as I watch and look around this room at the actual artwork. And I noticed, my question is, I noticed that you described all the countries that she'd been to, and I can see the international influences of all the countries, but most of them were in Africa. And when I look at the artwork, I think of Brazil. And I didn't hear you say anything about Brazil because of the native African influence and the native.
She did go to Brazil. Good one. Good catch. I left that one out because I didn't want to read from a list, but thank you. Did you want to say more about what you connected?
No, I just, the colors, as you described, the black against the vibrant colors, it reminded me of my experience in Brazil and with Brazilian art, for example, specifically. It's very, very powerful. But her work in general, I'm sorry, is just, thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you. And you said the word specifically, and you recognized the Brazilian qualities in some of the works, and I think that is a testament to Barbara's mastery that Syd was talking about. This is not a generic, pastiche of the African diaspora. She's not like, oh, check cowrie shells, check, any artist has to figure out how to find something that connects with their identity, that's meaningful, their own process, all that sort of thing, but it's her integrity and her specificity that make it transcend these mundane materials, like Syd was saying. How do you take acrylic, gouache, thumbtacks, really? But it makes my soul vibrate. And so that's the magic that you cannot, as Syd was saying, you can't emulate that. Try to do that.
Well, it also has to do with belief. Throughout all of these, you are seeing representations of the essentials of Yoruba culture. So there's so much of that, and I think that in terms of Barbara's understanding of those traditions and her ability to interpret them, that's part of it, and that's so important to her in terms of how her art enters the world and what's appropriate for it. Because there is this respect for and acknowledgement of these spiritual realms and spaces that can't be violated by commerce, that need to be respected because of their relationship to these centuries-old traditions and beliefs that stabilize and have stabilized.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simona Hill, and I'm a sociologist currently writing on trauma. And I just have to say, I think the last time I had an experience at an event, this is the word vociferous. You know, this is a noisy place. I can't hear Syd and Andrea because the pieces are beating. Somebody used the word pulsating. I mean, I can't concentrate. This picture up here of George Foreman.
George Floyd, yes.
Lord have mercy. We're going to have to get a grill up here. But I'm looking at the picture, and if I had one picture of all of these, one piece to put up for a classroom for Black History Month, it would be that picture. Why? Because I'm looking at it, and I know you told me that it's about George Floyd, but I'm hearing Sojourner Truth. I'm hearing Crispus Attucks. He never speaks to me. I'm hearing all of these people. It's evocative. I don't know what word is. I don't know the right word to use. But you see and hear the history. It's saying, remember me, remember me, remember where you come from, remember who you are. And for me, that connects with trauma. How do you recover from that as a people, as a diaspora, as a nation, as a human? And I thank you, and I thank you, Ms. Bullock.
I don't know if anyone could be more eloquent. Thank you. Thank you.
There are emotions that just are locked in here that come falling out, and the kids who are completely open, they have no agenda. They respond in such specific ways. That's scary, and it's scary. That's beautiful. All those things. So I wonder whether you could just talk a little bit more about the emotions that it feels like they're floating. You know, when I look at the Trayvon Martin piece, which I look at all the time, it feels like it's so filled with emotion that it's sometimes hard to look at because it's just so heavy with it. But it feels like they're all inside and behind some of the curled paper.
My response to this piece, when you look at it, it goes back to that issue of, first off, in terms of scale, it's us. There but for the grace of God go I, as a Black person in this country. I could easily have been that victim. So immediately there is this sense of dread that comes off of it. But then the thing is animated. The thing twists and turns in space. Buried in it are hands and feet and movement. And it is both forming and deforming at the same time. So in terms of the issue of emotion around it, without the title, Trayvon Martin, would I still get those same feelings from it if I didn't know that was Trayvon Martin? And I think I would, because buried in the layers, all this information, the color, the scale, the sense of trauma, the weeping. So for me, once again, Barbara is using her ability to draw and create shape and work over time to build up this sense of the narrative, of the implication of what this object represents, because it is telling about that trauma, and you don't need the title.
I just want to add something to what Syd just said. And we gave a tour, Flo Gello and I gave a tour on Tuesday to a group of staff from an organization called Family Promise. They work with families that have been evicted from their homes. And I stood in front of the label, and we were looking at Trayvon Martin. And I just said, look, give me a word if you have a word. And what came out was pain, heartbroken, suffering, chaos. And then when we talked a little bit, and they found the hands, and they found the heart, and they found the foot, and they talked about the red and the black and the torn. I mean, nothing is torn, it's cut, but the feeling being torn. So without knowing the subject matter, because I know it too, so I look at it and that's all I think about. But I've always wanted to look at it without knowing what the title was. And without knowing, this was the response. And then I told them, and we talked more about it. So I just wanted to add that. And go on with other questions.
Well, this is absolutely piggybacking on both of these. The mystery of this work is so profound that I was wondering, what would it be like not to have the titles, but just to stand in front and feel what was coming, towards us without the titles. Anyway.
Thanks to everybody who made this conversation possible. Syd, you mentioned molding information, materials, and of course, as a ceramicist and Barbara working with paper, I'm wondering if you have anything to offer us in regard to this, the connection of molding materials. As I said, you work with clay, Barbara works with paper, and you all are molding materials together. And just curious if you had any comment about that process and about your connection in that way. Do you understand?
I think that what she's asking is, right in front of me. I think what she's asking is, myself as a person who works in clay, Barbara who works in paper and paint, what kind of relationship I guess we have with those materials and how those materials facilitate what we do. So for me, what's important is to make sure that I listen to the material. And I think that the discoveries that Barbara was able to make and the transitions she was able to make from paint to paper to cutting, all of these things was also being humble before your material. Not to come with preconceived notions about what the material will do. You have to develop a relationship to your materials. That comes over time. That comes from making a lot of bad stuff. And you make a lot of bad stuff, and then you start to develop the relationship with the material. So when I'm working with clay, I may have some intent, but that intent is so flexible. It's so about, well, if I start this process, be sure to see what the material is going to tell me, what it's going to do and what it's not going to do, and what it can do. And just so there's a, I'm walking alongside of my material. I'm not walking on it.
I think this has been an extraordinary conversation, and I'm blown away by so many of the comments. And I did want to talk a little bit about the choices of works. Syd, you brought up, a retrospective requires a museum to make selections, and I thought I would just respond to that by just giving a sense of some of the things that we were thinking about that helped us make these selections. And I really do mean us, because here at Woodmere, we tend to do things in a very teamwork-like way. And when we're working with a living artist, of course, we are doing this together. And so there are some works of art here that Barbara said have to be in the show. So for example, it was Barbara who said, the dancing figure that's from the collection of the African American Museum has to be in the show if this is to be a retrospective. And of course, that meant that something else couldn't be there that was from, say that period, of her time. And so, I just want to, acknowledge and thank Barbara for all the input, that went into a lot of hard choices. Because if you have a concept of the way that you want an exhibition to breathe, like we could have put a lot more stuff in the space, but we wanted everything to really have a specialness and a place on of its own. And so I loved, Syd, what you said about the scale of the installation and how each work is human scale. And I do want to give credit, where is he? To Rick Ortwine, who's the Deputy Director for Exhibitions here at Woodmere, because really, Rick is extraordinary, and the decision about installation and what are going to be the major markers on the wall really come from Rick. And when Rick is installing a show, we leave him alone because it's a creative process. And Barbara would come in, I would come in, Hildy would come in and say, I really do need that mask down here because we're going to be making masks with children and they need to see it. And so the mask, which was originally upstairs with some of the other masks, down it came. And so, some of the choices about the installation have to do with the activities of the museum and knowing that there's going to be kids on the floor making masks and they need access to that. We wanted the show to be a retrospective and to mark time. And we know that Barbara, and again, I think you expressed this so beautifully, that there's an embeddedness in the moment that then transcends and gets bigger. And yes, this has been a rough 2 weeks, right, in the world. We've had people crying in the galleries. And, somebody said to me, I look at this work and I feel the chaos that I'm feeling right now. And yet I see a beauty. And, the person was, speaking through, deep emotion. But we wanted to give a sense of the things that mark time. And so we wanted works that relate directly, to the African art movement in American art of the 1960s and 70s, where artists are looking specifically at African forms of dance and other, fabrics and movement coming from Africa. And that was an important historical moment. The AIDS crisis, which is a turning point for Barbara, and that very fierce, that first healer who's so aggressive, was Barbara's. Something needed to confront the horribleness of what is happening. We talked about Katrina. I remember where I was when I heard on the radio what was happening. Trayvon Martin, the COVID pandemic, that we wanted to have markers in the show that would help people place themselves in history, our own history, that many of us have lived through. Some younger people haven't lived through, some of these things, but we wanted, American history of the last 50 years of Barbara's art making to be here on the walls. The other thing that was so important to us in organizing the show and selecting objects is that one of the things that makes Barbara so special to me as an artist, and again, Andrea, I thought you conveyed this so beautifully when you were talking about Barbara's studio and the seamlessness between art and life. Barbara has supported herself as an educator, and that's an aspect of the work that has been so important to many museums in this city of Philadelphia. I mean, I heard about Barbara first years ago when I was working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art because Barbara was working there, together with Diane Pieri. Barbara worked, for Prints in Progress, which was a program of the Print Center. She's done art projects here with Hildy and with students here at Woodmere, and there's so much about Barbara's studio practice that then inspires the way that art can go into people's lives. And so an important part of the show are, the pop-up books and the relationship between the pop-up books and the cut paper pieces, and how the cut paper pieces make the pop-up books possible. And then, and again, we had the amazing experience, people often ask us, like, where do these works go when they're not up on the wall? Well, Barbara designs crates for these pieces, and some of them kind of parts fold together and then they open up when gravity does its thing. And so you take it out of its crate, each piece has ribbons that hold them in place, and then they unfold on the wall. And it's like the pop-up book. It's an extraordinary thing to see happen. And so we wanted to show the pop-up books, the puppets, and for us at Woodmere, we are incredibly grateful and honored that Barbara selected Woodmere as the institution that would preserve her teaching archive. And so, Barbara gave to Hildy about 2 or 3 very organized file boxes of her lesson plans. And you can see an example in the crate over there with the puppet with the talking face. And you can see how beautiful each of these lesson plans is because it's marked out, it's written out. It's stepwise described, the origami that has to be done to figure out the face of the of the puppet, but we wanted to show this continuous aspect of integrating, art and life together, and I think that came across so beautifully, and you do see it so gorgeously in the studio. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and I do have some works of art by Barbara that I regret aren't here, like The Dark Gods, for example, which is a major painting that we've shown here several times at Woodmere. And again, we made decisions that we're going to focus on the dancers, and we just don't have the wall space for The Dark Gods. But The Dark Gods is part of a series of works called the Jasmine Gardens that are, Barbara's erotic series. And those are represented in a series of drawings that are upstairs on the balcony. And it really hit me, Syd, when you were talking about the encounter-like relationship that we have with the work. And I'm thinking about, the importance of these erotic works to Barbara, which are all about people coming together and making love, but it is physical and visceral and erotic, but it's also about people coming together. And what's so interesting to me about this conversation is it made me understand something more about that erotic series and how it permeates so much of the art that then gets made later on. And so in terms of a retrospective, we didn't include The Dark Gods, which is the great big masterpiece of the erotic moment of Barbara's work. We included other pieces, however, that I feel tell the story in a different way. And I think what's so beautiful about this conversation today is, for me at least, you sort of opened it up for me to understand some of the glue here that exists over time from the earlier works and then through the whole trajectory of the work. Now, Barbara is sitting here, and I do have to say, Barbara, that I would love to hand you the microphone and ask you if you have anything to say. And it could just be a quick thank you, or is there anything that you'd like to say to Syd and Andrea, or to me, or to everyone? And I'm going to bring the microphone over because I think at the very least, we want to recognize you and.
This is why really I'm not good with my but just listening to you, it was like otherworldly for me. Because a lot of times I look at my work. Can you hear me? A lot of times I look at my work, and it's strange to me when it's finished. And I know that it's not only me working. So just listening to, I was really trying to hear every word that you said. And I feel so honored that you really looked at my work. And that all of you came to see the exhibition. I was just talking to someone the other day, I'm gonna keep this short. I was just talking to someone the other day about being an artist, and it's so complicated. It's like when I walked into the gallery and I saw my work, I felt like I was in another world. And that's the way it looked to me. It looked about all of the people that I knew, and of course all the people who aren't here anymore. But as an artist, I don't think I could ever stop painting or stop thinking that way, even when I'm on YouTube, and I have a guilt there, and so I start drawing from YouTube. But I don't know, it's such a gift to be able to create, and that is your voice. That's my voice. That's probably what I'm trying to say. I only wanted to hear what you had to say. And I really love the idea of people not only looking at the words that are written, but looking at the work for yourself. Because it's a language. That's what it is for me. It's that language. And I can only say I didn't have it when I was younger. And so, therefore, I needed it. So art has almost been like this need for me. But, and I also want to say that working with paper is like, I don't know, it's like life. And when you paint, the paint just goes right into the paper. It just, I mean, it starts talking to you. You know, it's hard to describe theater work. I mean, being in your workshop, you can't describe it. It's just impossible. You're just working and hoping that all these things are coming out of you. And I don't know, I love the fact that I've always been an artist. I've always just loved speaking through these different materials. And I'm so fortunate that I know the people that I've always worked with. Diane Ferry, that's my friend here, Ann. I mean, Charles Searles and Mo Brooker and all of them, you know, it's like it was a constant gift, just communicating with each other. And we always needed each other, you know, to understand what we were doing. And I'm gonna keep this short because it's like really emotional for me. But thank you. And Bill, Bill's like a friend to me. And I know I should be calling him another name, but it's like Bill, you know, Bill.
That's what everybody calls me.
Yeah. And Hildy, I mean, thank you so much, Hildy. It's like we have a new friendship. I always said as I got older, I'm not making any new friends, but I am making new friends.
Your work to me is transcendent because it is truly the language of the soul, and that is what touches me. So.
Good evening. I'm emotional about your work because I've seen it for so long. And thank you. The part of the work that I've seen that others hadn't was the fiber work. At Ile Ife, I was going to art class there on the 3rd floor. I'm watching Barbara and Martha Jackson Jarvis with the kids create a village out of clay. I'm watching her make a doll, sewing all the features. And an Adinkra cloth where she was joining the edges of the cloth in the traditional way as they would do in Ghana with a figure 8 striped design. That was in the 70s, but it has stayed on my mind. And just thank you, because the only thing I can think of to describe is the phrase, the evidence of things unseen is what is left with me.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you. Please, let's enjoy the exhibition, but join us in the historical galleries for a glass of wine, some refreshment, and we can continue the conversation one by one. And thank you all, thank you especially Barbara, for the amazing gift of the art that you've brought into the world.
Good job.